It's one of the oldest and biggest questions we ever ask ourselves. And today we're going to tackle a really surprising and honestly pretty controversial answer to it. We're diving into this idea called soul sleep, a belief that seriously challenges what most people think happens in the afterlife.
I mean, really think about it for a second. The very moment your heart stops, your last breath is gone, what comes next? Is it an immediate trip somewhere? Or is it something else entirely?
All right, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll get a clear definition of what soul sleep even is. Then, we'll look at the Bible verses people use to argue for it. After that, we'll dive into the biblical case against it. And finally, we'll see why this whole debate is such a big deal for Christian theology.
Okay, so let's get right into it. What exactly are we talking about when we say soul sleep?
So the basic idea is this. When you die, there's no immediate conscious experience. You don't go straight to heaven or hell. Instead, your soul just enters a state of suspended animation. A complete lack of awareness, like being in the deepest possible sleep until the end of time.
And what's really interesting here is that this isn't just one single idea. Nope, it actually splits into two different camps. The first one says, okay, your soul is still there, it just goes dormant, completely unaware. But the second view, it's much more extreme. This is the one held by groups like Jehovah's Witnesses. They believe you just cease to exist. Poof, your soul is annihilated. And then, at the resurrection, God has to basically recreate a perfect copy of you from scratch.
So, you might be asking, where in the world does this idea even come from? Well, its supporters build their entire case on one key argument, and for them, it's their single, strongest piece of evidence.
The whole thing really hinges on a single choice in how you read the Bible. They take every time the Bible uses the word sleep to talk about death, and they read it not as a metaphor, not as poetry, but as a literal, scientific description of what's happening to the soul. This verse from the Old Testament book of Daniel is a perfect example. Someone who believes in soul sleep looks at that phrase, sleep in the dust of the earth, and says, see, it means you're literally unconscious, just like when you're asleep in bed, until you awake on Judgment Day. Okay, but how well does that literal interpretation really hold up when you look at the rest of the Bible? Well, the counter-argument is that it completely misses the bigger picture, and frankly ignores a mountain of evidence pointing the other way. And really, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Is the Bible trying to give us a precise metaphysical breakdown of the afterlife, or is it just using a common, everyday figure of speech? To really get the counter-argument, we just have to think about how we talk. We use what's called phenomenological language all the time. For example, we all say the sun rises. Are we making a scientific claim that the sun is moving around the earth? Of course not. We're just describing what it looks like from our point of view. The argument is the Bible does the same thing. A dead body looks peaceful, like it's sleeping. It's a beautiful euphemism describing the appearance, not a theological treatise on the state of the soul.
And once you get past that one interpretation of the word sleep, you start seeing examples of a conscious afterlife everywhere. I mean, Jesus himself tells a story about a rich man and a poor beggar who both die and are immediately conscious, one in comfort, the other in agony. And then there's the time Jesus has a full-on conversation with Moses and Elijah, who'd been dead for hundreds of years. And how can you have a great cloud of witnesses watching us from heaven if they're all just unconscious?
But maybe the biggest, most direct challenge to this whole idea comes from Jesus himself right on the cross. Think about what he says to the thief next to him. He promises, truly, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. That one word, today, it's so powerful. It just doesn't leave any wiggle room for a long 1,000-year nap, does it?
The Apostle Paul doubles down on this. For him, death isn't some long, empty pause. He sees it as an immediate transition. The very moment you are absent from the body, you are present with the Lord. It's like changing your address, not being put on hold. And get this, even in the book of Revelation, which is full of symbols, the souls of the martyrs who died for their faith are not sleeping. They're awake. They're aware of time passing. They are actively crying out to God. You can't really do that if you're unconscious.
Or look at the last words of Stephen, the very first Christian martyr. As he's dying, he prays, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. Now that prayer only makes sense if his spirit is a real conscious thing that's about to continue on after his body dies. He's not asking Jesus to just receive his last breath.
So you see, this isn't just some friendly debate over a few Bible verses. The whole idea of soul sleep has these massive ripple effects that clash with some of the deepest foundations of Christian theology and even philosophy. Let's go back to that second, more extreme version for a minute, the one where you're annihilated and then recreated. This brings up a huge philosophical problem. I mean, if you are totally wiped from existence and then thousands of years later, God creates a new being that has all your memories and looks just like you, is that new being really you, or is it just a perfect copy? This is what philosophers call the copy problem, and it's a big one. The original you, the person who lived your life and made all your choices, just vanished. That person was never rewarded or punished. And this new copy? It's being judged for sins it never actually committed. For resurrection and final judgment to have any real meaning, there has to be a continuous you that exists the whole time.
And at the end of the day, that's why soul sleep has been considered a heresy by mainstream Christianity for centuries. It just flat out contradicts these core fundamental beliefs about the immortality of the soul, about what happens right after death, and about the communion of saints, this idea that we're all still connected to those who have gone before us.
And it's also pretty telling that this belief doesn't usually show up by itself. If you look at the groups throughout history that have taught soul sleep, you'll often find they also reject other really central Christian doctrines, like the Trinity or the idea that Jesus was fully God. It's often one piece of a much larger alternative system of belief. So that's really the heart of the conflict. Is death a pause button on your existence, just an empty, unconscious blank space before the story finally ends? Or is it a doorway? An immediate transition from this life into the next conscious state. Based on the overwhelming weight of the evidence, the Christian faith has always concluded it's a doorway.